Good evening. I'm BenEzra, host, producer of Conversations. My guest really needs no introduction to the watching audience, but he happens to be Harrison Gregg, who's just spent the last 19 years moderating the greatest show on earth called Town Meeting, probably the most publicized and most watched program we've had over the years. Harrison, welcome.
Happy to be here.
It's been a long road.
It has.
A lot of things have happened. I remember you were on the board back in 1988, 1989, and I understand the move was made to this location around that time. And here we are thinking about building down the road from here. Let's start out with those early memories. Tell us about what it was like to be involved with public access in that period of time.
Well, this was before the internet was generally available, and people did not have all the different options that they have now today for producing their own video. So this was a place where people learned how to do video and could borrow cameras, take them off site to do shoots at events and so forth. And it was the beginning of the coverage of many public meetings. Town meeting had, of course, been covered for some years, but eventually most of the major boards became subject to coverage, and I guess they still are.
Yeah, that's been a big part of our working life here at ACTV, and we involve as much as 18 students at any one time in all those meetings that you're talking about.
Right.
And it's been a wonderful learning experience for people coming out of the high school and junior high school.
There's a lot more of that now than there was in my day.
Yeah. Well, I think it has to do with the progress we're making here, that we're building partners all the time. That ACTV, now known as Amherst Media, has paid its way into the presence. We're part of the institutional experience that's Amherst today, and I think the towns work very hard to make this happen.
Yeah, good cooperation with the town government, and of course with town meeting, and of course over the years with the League of Women Voters, and now the town meeting coordinating committee. A number of partners, as you say, have made things possible.
You stepped down in the past, this fall. You chose not to run after 19 years. I think there's a time for everything. So we won't talk about the future, but we would love to talk about the past, because there's a lot of history in the 19 years. You want to talk about that past?
Well, I don't know where to begin. From a personal standpoint, I was introduced to town meeting, to the whole institution of town meeting, of a New England town meeting, when I lived in New Salem a few years before I moved to Amherst. I came from Minnesota, where we didn't have town meeting. We just had some mayor and councils in most municipalities. So I thought town meeting was an incredible thing. Anybody could get up and say anything they wanted to. I didn't envision then that I would be a moderator. So I moved to Amherst in '78, and in '82 I ran for town meeting from precinct 5, then it was 7 actually. And I served for 12 years as a town meeting member. During that time I hardly ever had the nerve to get up and say anything. The few times I did speak, I was terrified, shaking.
That's not the Harrison Gregg we know.
Well, it's a little different when you're up there in control of the meeting and when you're just down on the floor. I don't know, for some people would much rather be on, most people would rather be on the floor than up in front. But I was more comfortable up in front than I was down on the floor. But when Bill Field was moderator when I came on, and he served, I think, a total of 20 years. And he went off in '91, decided not to run again. And Francesca Maltese was elected, served for 3 years, and then decided with her job involving a lot of nighttime meetings and demands of her family that she couldn't continue. So she announced that she wasn't running again. And at that point, I was president of ACTV. And I thought, you know, I'm not afraid to tell grown-ups to shut up. I've had a little experience at that, running meetings. So I've also been chairman of a couple of committees at my church as well. So I said, I've been watching Bill Field and Francesca for 12 years, and I said, I think I can do that. And I ran, and nobody ran against me. And only twice have I had any opposition over the 19 years that I've served. But it's a job in which you, first of all, you have to know the rules, and you have to be able to come up with the appropriate rule at the appropriate time and be willing and able to enforce it.
And we're talking about a public presence of over 200 people on a couple of nights a week, so that was no simple task.
No, it took some time. It took some commitment. The other thing I was thinking of, you need to know the rules and be willing to enforce them and willing to apply them. And then secondly, you need to be fair, and you need to, probably perhaps even more important, appear to be fair. That is, to not appear to be favoring certain groups or certain positions, to try to shape a debate that gives everyone a chance, not everyone necessarily, but most point of views a chance to be expressed, and opposing point of views a chance to be, both sides of issues to be expressed. And it's awfully important that you keep that reputation for fairness. That doesn't mean that people aren't going to say you were unfair or that you're favoring the other side, because they almost invariably do think you're favoring the other side. But when they stand back and are more objective about it, I think they can say that I was pretty even-handed on whom I called on. I did think it was important to that the people who are presenting a motion have the opportunity to explain why they presented it the way they did, what the reasons for it were, to answer questions that come up along the way. So invariably, these people perhaps may seem to be getting more time, but I made a real effort to see that the people who were opposing the article would also be heard.
And I love that engagement that takes place, because when people step up and challenge something in an article, it's awfully important that the article writer have an opportunity to engage in answering the questions. That's the only way the rest of us who are sitting back and listening intently can make a judgment about the validity of what's being presented or the challenge to what's being presented. And when that happens, people tend to get a little restless, because all too often there are people saying, well, let's just call the question and get it over with. And that's probably one of the most disturbing things when you really haven't had a chance. And it's the moderator who has to kind of see that that doesn't happen, that the flow of the process is allowed to take place, because that's the only way we can render a decision based on real factual information.
Right. Well, the previous question is an important tool, and I have to keep reminding town meeting that moving the previous question does not end debate. It has to be voted on, and 2/3 of town meeting have to agree. So as long as you have more than 1/3 of town meeting who wants to keep talking, you're going to keep talking, regardless of how many times the question is moved. But it is easy. You were talking about the people who get impatient, who are presenting the articles. Perhaps often they're the people that are either in town government on one of the committees, or people who generally support the position of the town government. They do get impatient, and they think time is being wasted, and sometimes maybe it is being wasted, but it's important that the reasons, the rationale, get out there. I don't think always that the town government appreciates how helpful town meeting is to explain things to people so that they understand why things are happening the way they're happening, why things are being done the way they're being done. People have a lot of strange notions about town government who haven't been involved in it. But if they've been in town meeting and they sat there and listened, they know it's not a simple matter. They know that many of these issues are not black and white, and that the choices that have to be made are difficult choices, and that there's reasons behind the choices that have been made. You might not agree with those reasons, and then in that case you're going to oppose the decision, but you need to know what they are.
And what's fascinating, and I think about this all the time, having come from a different place 17 or 18 years ago, that I've never seen as much transparency and openness. It's pretty hard to fool anybody if anybody wants to fool around, because they're always going to be 10 more questions.
Right.
And what's the old saying? Democracy is messy, but it's better than anything else around. Sometimes we may seem to talk things to death, but that has a lot to do with not putting forward the kinds of information that people need to satisfy their questioning.
Yeah.
And so it's incumbent on both the individuals who come up with proposals, as well as town committees and select board, to present their views in a way that people understand what the issues are. And I've seen that the improvement over the last
I think there's a lot more information out there now, a lot better at presenting it. And when they leave a gap or don't present enough information, don't explain things clearly enough, they often suffer for it. I mean, their proposals often suffer. And then they have to go back to the drawing board and come back next time with a better explanation. But one thing about the people in Amherst, I think John Musani pointed this out a long time ago, they want to understand, they want to know. They're not just willing to take things at face value, they really want to know what's behind them, what the elements, what the steps are that are going to be taken. And that's one of the reasons we do have so much transparency. We have a tradition also on the part of the people in charge of being transparent, being open, and being willing to explain themselves. So the two work together, but I think we're as transparent here as anywhere in the Commonwealth.
Can you point to some of the more interesting subjects that we've talked about? Take a minute and recollect. I can think of a few, but I'd like to hear from you.
You weren't here yet when we did the parking garage, were you?
Oh yes.
You were already here?
Oh yes.
That was probably the most contentious, the most stressful of all the controversies that took place. The town's proposal for one parking garage, a larger parking garage, and then the citizens' counter proposal for a smaller one. And each needed 2/3 to pass, and neither of them could get 2/3 because there were more than 1/3 of the people against each proposal. And eventually it ended in a compromise, which 2/3 of town meeting were able to support. But if that compromise hadn't been taken, there would have been no garage at all.
So we have 2 levels instead of 3.
Right.
And that's still raging. There's still people who haven't finished fighting that battle, which I refuse to go to at this point.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things we could have done, and not all the ideas that came forward are necessarily the right ones. So that's part of the process.
But it was really emblematic of Amherst. It was very typical. The history of Amherst and microcosm, really, that whole controversy. We started town meeting in October and ended in December that year. I think we had 12 sessions. And I thought it was never going to be over. And people on both sides were mad at me, of course.
But what's interesting is I think that pushed the charter people to decide, well, we can't get it done this way, so let's change government.
It had a lot of influence on that.
I think that. And the first time it only lost by 23 votes. And then the second time around 250 votes. Now that part of our history is behind us.
I think the first vote was actually, it lost by 13 votes.
13.
There was a recount and it lost by 14. And then as you said, the second one, it was a greater margin. that was the second charter in my experience in Amherst. There was an earlier charter commission before I was moderator that was defeated more soundly, I believe. But
let's talk about the experience of people being in town meeting. I have, I've seen a lot of growth amongst a lot of people who over the years have taken it seriously and have evolved into what I call community leaders. Mm-hmm. And in fact, many of the people that got their start in the select board and town government roles came out of town meeting.
Oh yes, it's an almost essential introduction to town government if you want to be involved. Certainly on the select board level. There are many people who go directly to committees who don't come to town meeting, more specialized committees like conservation, planning, but it really helps to know, particularly if you're on the planning board, you need to understand that you got that 2/3 majority to deal with. And you need to know what will fly in town meeting and what won't. But the experience, town meeting, on the one hand, it exists to implement the will of the majority. And we must never forget that because it provides so strongly for the minority to have its say that it sometimes seems that it's the main reason of town meeting is for everyone to have their say. And that's not right. Really, the main reason for town meeting is to pass legislation, to pass a budget, to govern the town. And having a say feeds into that, but it's not the reason we're there. And sometimes have to remind people that it isn't, you can't think things haven't worked just because everyone who wanted to say something hasn't been heard. Enough people are heard so that a consensus has formed for a majority or a 2/3 majority, or has not formed. And it's pretty clear to most people that more debating isn't going to change things. Then it's time to vote, because you have things you have to do.
That's true, but the interesting thing for me in looking at the history of town meeting during the years that we both have served is the reality that the majority rules, but there's really minority security.
Absolutely.
The process allows it and demands it, and that's what keeps people coming back. That's what's different than other forms of town government.
Right. I think the rules that protect the minority, most particularly the previous question, that is, you keep talking until 2/3 of town meeting is willing to stop talking, or until no one wants to say anything. But that guarantees that things aren't just going to, the majority isn't going to just run roughshod over the minority. If you've got a majority of 55% and a minority of 44%, those 44% can keep talking until they're down to 33% before they can be shut up and it can proceed to a vote. So, and there are other rules that protect people's dignity, and such as not ascribing motives to people and not
or demeaning people.
Yeah.
Or calling them NIMBYs and stuff like that.
Right. And actually, I'm not sure that those rules are actually in writing. Those rules for civility, they've just always been there. And we have a lot more civility, and also the rule against applause, for instance. You don't want the person who lost the vote to feel too bad. They lost it, so you don't applaud, and you don't boo people. And we're much more civil than the House of Commons in England, for instance, where booing goes on all the time, and name calling.
That's a very fine line, because emotions sometimes just get the best of people. But nobody goes to jail because of it.
I noticed that I haven't been watching.
You just say, we'll have none of that. Please respect the rules.
Yeah.
But people have vented.
Well, there are the things that are not clear. Like I noticed the other night, I watched for a while, and someone said something about profit-making corporations. And the issue was, is that denigrating their motives or not? And someone else pointed out, well, corporations exist to make profits, so being profit-making isn't calling them names. So
That was very true. But I thought that was well handled.
it was
even the response to the challenge was with due respect for the moderator.
Respect is so important.
And
respect for the moderator and the moderator's
that was
respect
Ben
for the people.
Groscup. I thought he answered the question.
He's handled it beautifully. I've been very pleased with everything I've seen. I'm so delighted that he was there and waiting in the wings when I decided it was time to bow out. And Jim has been preparing himself now for several years.
Yes.
He's served when I've been away. He's taken my place. He's attended some of the meetings that moderator goes to. So he's as well prepared as anyone's ever been, I think, for that, to take on the job. And he's doing a great job.
And he's rolling with the punches because.
Oh, he is.
But
you got to have a thick skin.
But the important thing is that there's a process.
Yeah.
And when you have power, there's a real challenge to say, hey, I can stop the conversation if I can use some rules of procedure. But sometimes we've got to give people a little extra time. And
oh yeah, I was always a little lenient that way, but there are moderators. And I've been president of the State Moderators Association, attended for many years. Every town is a little different, and there are some moderators, particularly in small towns, who wield their power much more tyrannically than I think I do or have.
But we've stood up to you on those few occasions.
Well, I know. I think it was Bill Field who pointed out that there was a proposal from one of the committees that I was instructed to appoint to study town meeting. I think it was after the charter failed. While the charter was still an issue, the proposal was brought to town meeting to create a town meeting coordinating committee. Actually, earlier than that, there was a town meeting study committee. And I guess it was the later one. I can't remember. But anyway, one of the proposals that this committee brought for the change to town meeting was to have a parliamentarian. And I thought this was a terrible idea. And Bill Field argued against it because he said the rules were simple enough so that anyone could understand them. You didn't need someone to interpret them for the moderator. And I was so happy he did it. He said that as a member. I can't remember now who. I was going to attribute this to Bill, but it might have been someone else who said, town meeting has 240 parliamentarians. And another great quote came from Bob Paquette, the late newscaster.
Yes, I remember Bob.
He used to cover town meeting for. He used to actually have a kind of play-by-play, and I guess he did a voiceover for ACTV. But he said Amherst town meeting was 1,000 points of order. This was in the time when George H.W. Bush was talking about 1,000 points of light, and from Bob Paquette, it was town meeting is 1,000 points of order. And as you say, you're not in danger of misinterpreting the rules because somebody's going to jump on you immediately if you do. But points of order are very important to protect the individual, not just the minority, but the individual member. And you have to deal with them, and you have to deal with them immediately, and you have to deal with them civilly and respectfully, but you have to deal with them firmly. And you have to come back like a judge with either upheld or overruled. And then the moderator's decision is final. And there's no appeal. And you move on. The appeal is at the ballot box. If any moderator gets too tyrannical, he's only there for 1 year and you can get him out.
Well, I'm glad you were there for 19 years, Harrison.
Well, thank you very much, Isaac.
I think this is a wondrful way to celebrate. We have plans to celebrate community with town meeting in the fall. And so this conversation will be part of that. You've made town meeting worth going to. I really appreciate your role,
Well,
and I'm
thank you. I
sure the
appreciate that.
community does too.
It's been a great
Thank you
experience.
again. And that's it for conversations. I want to thank the volunteers who are here and the staff. And I just want to make one quick announcement. The Celebrating Community series, which started 2 months ago, you can go to amherstmedia.org and get the new Survival Center. We did a show there, and we just completed a Celebrating Community event at the 3 libraries in Amherst. So stay tuned. You know how to get to us, Amherst. So we'll see you soon. Good night, and thank you very much. And again, thank you so much, Harrison.
Thank you.